Life had always been simple for me, anchored in the routines of a peaceful countryside existence. At 30 years old, with a wife and our newborn daughter, my days revolved around family, work, and an unyielding love for nature. Living in the rural depths of upstate New York, where the nearest neighbor was a solid 25-minute walk away, I was surrounded by a breathtaking expanse of woods and cornfields. Our property spanned nearly 200 acres, with 50 dedicated to dense, untamed forest. For as long as I could remember, this land was my sanctuary. I had spent countless hours exploring its every shadow, learning the patterns of wildlife, and listening to the songs of birds carried by the wind. The outdoors was not just a place for me, it was a deeply rooted part of who I was. That day started like any other. I kissed my wife goodbye early in the morning, just as dawn was breaking, and headed off to work. It was February 2nd, a crisp, icy morning with a sky painted in muted shades of grey. I remember noticing how still everything felt that morning. Even the usual chirping of sparrows seemed subdued, almost hesitant. My wife had called me twice during the day, first to mention the cows. She sounded slightly alarmed, telling me they had been huddled in the corner of their fenced lot all morning, pressed together as if warding off some unseen threat. I brushed it off, assuming they were spooked by coyotes or some other nuisance. Later, she called again, this time to tell me about our dog. Maya, a year-old pit bull, was refusing to step outside. Normally bold and protective, she cowered by the door, trembling, her tail tucked tightly under her body. That caught my attention. Animals sense things we can't. Still, I dismissed it, reassuring her that I would look into it when I got home. The sun was already setting by the time I turned onto the dirt road that led to our house. The fields on either side were shadowed, their once golden stalks turned skeletal by winter's grip. As I approached our home, my eyes were drawn to the cows again. There were 12 of them, fully grown, each over 1,000 pounds, and yet they were pressed together in a corner of their lot, trembling like leaves. Their collective weight had bent the fencing inward. Something was terribly wrong. My stomach knotted as I parked the truck. The eerie silence around me felt oppressive. There was no wind, no sound of birds, not even the distant rustling of leaves. As I stepped out, I heard it for the first time, a deep, guttural growl. It was unlike anything I had ever heard. The sound reverberated through the cold air, raising every hair on my body. It was a mix of a snarl and a scream, an otherworldly noise that defied explanation. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest as I scanned the darkening woods for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the impenetrable shadows of the trees, standing silent and still. I hurried inside, my mind racing. My wife met me at the door, her eyes wide with fear. She pointed me toward the side of the house where deep gouges marred the siding. There were 4 distinct lines, as if something with massive claws had raked across it. The sight sent a chill down my spine. Then it came again, the growl. It was closer this time, louder, and filled with a malevolent energy that made my blood run cold. My wife clung to my arm, her voice trembling as she whispered, "What is that?" I called my neighbor, Jean, who lived a few miles up the road. Jean and I often hunted together, and I knew he would take me seriously. When I explained the situation, he agreed to meet me with his shotgun. Armed with my own 12-gauge and a high-powered spotlight, we climbed into the buggy and headed into the woods. The night had fully descended by then, wrapping the forest in an impenetrable darkness. The only light came from the buggy's headlamps, casting long, eerie shadows that danced with every bump in the road. The first sign of trouble came when we spotted the deer. They burst from the trees in waves, their white tails flashing as they fled. It wasn't just a few deer, there were dozens, sprinting in panicked groups that barely registered our presence. Jean and I exchanged uneasy glances. Deer didn't behave like this unless something had sent them into a frenzy. Then we heard it. A heavy, rhythmic breathing coming from somewhere in the trees. I killed the engine, and the silence that followed was deafening. My pulse thundered in my ears as I swung the spotlight into the woods. For a moment there was nothing, just the gnarled trunks of trees and the skeletal branches above. And then I saw it. At first it was just a silhouette, partially obscured by a massive oak, But as the spotlight caught it fully, my breath hitched in my throat. It was enormous, at least 8 feet tall, with a massive muscular frame covered in short, dark fur. Its head was unmistakably canine, with pointed ears and a long, narrow snout, but it wasn't a dog. Its body was too human, its movements too deliberate. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural amber light, reflecting the beam of my spotlight like 2 burning coals. Jean whispered a string of curses under his breath, and I heard the click of his shotgun. Before I could react, he fired. The first shot hit the creature square in the chest. I saw the spray of blood, the way its massive body recoiled. But it didn't fall. Instead, it let out a scream, a blood-curdling, bone-chilling sound that echoed through the woods and seemed to rattle the very air around us. The creature's scream was like nothing I had ever heard, a sound so piercing and guttural it reverberated in my chest. It felt primal, like a warning ripped straight from the depths of some ancient predator's instinct. Jean fired again, pumping the shotgun quickly, his hands trembling. The second shot hit the creature's shoulder, jerking its massive form back against the tree, but it still didn't fall. Instead, it dropped to all fours, snarling and glaring at us with those glowing amber eyes. "Go! Drive!" Jean yelled, his voice cracking with panic. My hand fumbled for the buggy's ignition, the keys trembling in my grip. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas. The vehicle lurched forward, tires spinning on the uneven dirt road, and we barreled deeper into the woods. The buggy's headlights carved narrow beams through the trees, illuminating the endless trunks and underbrush as we sped along the narrow trail. I dared to glance in the side mirror, my heart dropping when I saw the creature bounding after us. Its movements were unnervingly fast, a blur of dark fur and rippling muscle. It was running on 2 legs, its strides impossibly long, covering ground faster than I thought possible. "Is it still behind us?" Jean asked, his voice barely audible over the growl of the engine. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My eyes were fixed on the road ahead, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The buggy bounced and swerved as I pushed it to its limits, trying to put as much distance as possible between us and that thing. Suddenly, the path split ahead. To the left, the road curved back toward the main trail. To the right, it plunged deeper into the forest, an overgrown and less traveled route that was barely visible in the dim light. I made a split-second decision and veered right, hoping the rough terrain would slow the creature down. It didn't. The buggy's tires skidded and bounced over the uneven ground, throwing us violently against our seats. Jean clung to his shotgun, his knuckles just as white as mine. I risked another glance in the mirror, and my stomach clenched when I saw the creature was even closer now, its hulking form illuminated in the red glow of the tail lights. It wasn't just running, it was leaping, covering 15 or 20 feet in a single bound, closing the gap between us with terrifying ease. Before I could react, there was a loud thud and the buggy lurched to the side. The creature had slammed into us, its massive hand clawing at the rear of the vehicle. I felt the impact reverberate through the frame, the metal groaning under its strength. Jean screamed and fired his shotgun again, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the creature's snarling face. This time the shot hit its leg and it stumbled, falling to the ground in a heap. I hit the gas even harder, the engine whining in protest as we surged forward. The buggy skidded around a corner, narrowly avoiding a tree, and I fought to keep it on the trail. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. But for the first time I dared to hope that we might actually escape. That hope was short-lived. A moment later, I heard the sound of crashing branches to my left. The creature wasn't behind us anymore, it was beside us, smashing through the underbrush like a freight train. I turned my head just in time to see it leap out of the shadows, its massive form landing mere feet from the buggy. Its eyes locked on mine, and for a split second, time seemed to freeze. I will never forget the look in those eyes. There was intelligence there, a cold, calculating awareness that sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just an animal. This was something far worse. Before I could react, the creature lunged at the buggy, its claws raking across the metal frame with a deafening screech. Jean fired again, but the creature moved too quickly, dodging the shot with unnatural agility. It leapt onto the hood, its massive claws digging into the metal as it stared through the windshield at me. I could see its teeth, now jagged and impossibly sharp, glinting in the dim light. "Shoot it! Shoot it!" I screamed, my voice hoarse with terror. Jean fumbled with the shotgun, trying to reload, but the creature was too fast. It slammed its hand down on the windshield, cracking the glass. I ducked instinctively, my hand still gripping the wheel, and swerved wildly, trying to throw it off. The buggy veered off the trail, crashing through bushes and small trees before skidding to a stop in a clearing. The creature was thrown from the hood, tumbling to the ground in a heap. For a moment, everything was still. I could hear nothing but the pounding of my heart and the rasping of my own breath. Then it rose. Slowly, impossibly, the creature stood, its hulking frame towering over us in the dim light. Blood dripped from a wound in its chest where Jean's earlier shot had hit, but it didn't seem to care. It let out another roar, louder and more guttural than before, and I felt the sound reverberate in my very bones. I knew then that there was no escaping this. This wasn't a predator looking for food. This was something far worse. Something that wanted to hunt us, to toy with us, to make us suffer. The creature took a step forward, its massive claws leaving deep gouges in the ground. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My entire body was paralyzed with fear as I stared at this monstrous figure, its amber eyes glowing with an intensity that felt almost supernatural. Jean, finally reloading his shotgun, broke the spell with a sharp cry. "Get behind me!" he shouted, raising the weapon and firing again. The shot hit the creature square in the chest, and for the first time it staggered backward, its massive frame lurching from the impact. But even then, it didn't fall. Instead, it bared its teeth and snarled, a sound so guttural and primal that it made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I scrambled out of the buggy, my legs feeling like jelly as I tried to put some distance between myself and the monster. Jean fired again, this time hitting its shoulder. The creature roared in fury, the sound echoing through the clearing, and then it charged. It moved faster than I thought possible, closing the gap between us in mere seconds. Jean barely had time to raise his shotgun again before the creature swatted it aside with a single powerful swipe. The weapon flew through the air, landing somewhere in the underbrush, and Jean was left defenseless. I watched in horror as the creature lunged at him, its massive claws swinging in a deadly arc. Jean managed to dodge to the side, but the movement was awkward, and he stumbled, falling to the ground. The creature loomed over him, its teeth bared, ready to strike. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice breaking with desperation. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a weapon, didn't have a plan. But I couldn't just stand there and watch as it killed him. The creature's head snapped toward me, its glowing eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, I thought I had made a terrible mistake. But then Jean seized the opportunity, grabbing a large branch from the ground and swinging it with all his strength. The makeshift weapon struck the creature's side, and it roared in anger, turning its attention back to him. I stumbled backward, frantically scanning the clearing for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes landed on a large rock near the base of a tree, and I lunged for it, my fingers scraping against the rough surface as I picked it up. The creature was still focused on Jean, who was swinging the branch wildly, trying to keep it at bay. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I hurled the rock at the creature with all my strength. It struck the side of its head, and the beast let out a sharp, pained snarl, staggering slightly. It turned toward me again, its eyes blazing with fury, and for a moment I thought it might leave Jean and come after me instead. But then the roar of an engine shattered the tense silence. Headlights flooded the clearing as another buggy burst through the trees, its driver leaning out and shouting. It was one of my neighbors, an older man named Frank, who had likely heard the commotion and come to investigate. He was holding a rifle, and as soon as he spotted the creature, He raised it and fired. The shot hit the beast in the leg, and this time it finally seemed to register the pain. It let out a deafening roar and retreated a few steps, its massive frame trembling with rage. Frank fired again, and the creature turned, bounding into the woods with a series of thunderous crashes. For a long moment, none of us moved. The clearing was eerily silent, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and our ragged breathing. Then Frank spoke, his voice shaky. "What in God's name was that?" Jean and I exchanged a look, both of us too stunned to answer. Finally I managed to speak, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but it's still out there." Frank nodded grimly, his eyes scanning the tree line as if expecting the creature to return at any moment. "We need to get back to the house. Now." We piled into Frank's buggy, leaving my own vehicle behind in the clearing. The ride back to the house was a blur, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. What was that thing? Where had it come from? And most importantly, would it come back? By the time we reached the house, my wife was standing on the porch, her face pale with worry. "What happened?" she demanded as we stumbled out of the buggy. "What's going on?" I didn't know how to answer her. How do you explain something like that? How do you put into words the sheer terror of coming face to face with a creature that shouldn't exist? "It's complicated," I finally said, my voice trembling. "Just get inside, lock the doors." The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear and uncertainty. We didn't sleep. Instead, we sat in the living room, all of us armed with whatever weapons we could find, listening for any signs of the creature's return. But the woods remained silent, an oppressive stillness settling over the property. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, I finally allowed myself to relax, if only slightly. The creature hadn't come back. Maybe it was gone for good. But even as I tried to convince myself of that, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, watching, waiting. The scratches on the side of the house were a grim reminder of how close we had come to losing everything. And as I looked out at the tree line, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the end, or just the beginning? As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the curtains, the relief was fleeting. The morning felt heavier than it should, as though the nightmare of the previous night had left an indelible mark on the air itself. The house was unnervingly silent. Jean had fallen asleep in the chair by the front window, shotgun across his lap, while Frank leaned against the wall, his rifle still in hand. My wife sat beside me on the couch, our daughter in her arms, her small frame wrapped tightly in a blanket. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind rattling the window panes, sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. I had always been a man who felt safest in the woods. Now, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were prisoners in our own home. When Frank finally stirred, he glanced at me, his expression grim. "You think it's gone?" he asked, his voice rough from lack of sleep. I shook my head. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I doubt it." Jean groaned as he shifted in the chair, rubbing his eyes before glancing out the window. "We need to figure out what to do," he muttered. "That thing, it's not natural." No one argued with him. What could we say? None of us had any answers. All we knew was that something monstrous had invaded our lives, and we had no idea how to stop it. Later that morning, as the sun climbed higher into the sky, Frank suggested we go out to inspect the property. "We need to know if it's still around," he said. "And if it's not, we need to see what kind of damage it left." I didn't want to leave the house, but I knew he was right. We couldn't just sit there and wait. We armed ourselves, Jean with his shotgun, Frank with his rifle, and me with the old hunting knife I kept in a drawer by the front door, and stepped outside. The yard was eerily quiet. Even the birds seemed hesitant to make a sound. The cattle were huddled near the barn, their movements skittish, and the dog, Maya, refused to leave the porch. As we moved toward the tree line, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It wasn't long before we found the first signs of the creature's rampage. Deep gouges marred the trunks of several trees, the bark shredded as though something massive had raked its claws across them. Further into the woods, we discovered more. Broken branches, patches of flattened grass, and chillingly a trail of blood. The blood was fresh, its bright crimson color stark against the forest floor. Jean crouched down to examine it, his face pale. "This is from that thing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's injured." "Good," Frank muttered, gripping his rifle tightly. "Maybe it'll bleed out." But even as he said it, I knew it wasn't true. That creature had taken a shotgun blast to the chest and barely flinched. Whatever it wasn't going to go down easily. As we made our way back to the house, a sound stopped us in our tracks. The low rumble of an approaching engine. My heart leapt into my throat. For a moment, I thought the creature had returned, but then I realized the sound was coming from the road. We emerged from the woods to see a large black SUV pulling into the driveway. The vehicle's windows were heavily tinted, and its sleek, ominous design immediately set me on edge. As it came to a stop, the doors opened, and 3 men stepped out. They were dressed in plain, dark clothing, their expressions unreadable. The one in front was tall and broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard and piercing blue eyes. He approached us with a calm, measured gait, his hands visible at his sides. But there was something about him that radiated authority and danger. "Brandon," he said, addressing me by name, "we need to talk." I exchanged a wary glance with Frank and Jean before stepping forward. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the unease churning in my gut. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge, holding it up for me to see. It bore no recognizable insignia, just a simple emblem of a wolf's head surrounded by a circle of stars. "My name is Agent Daniels," he said. "I'm with a division of the government that deals with unusual occurrences." "Unusual occurrences?" I repeated, my voice tinged with disbelief. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means we know about the creature you encountered," he said, his tone matter-of-fact, "and we're here to handle it." The conversation that followed was one I'll never forget. Agent Daniels didn't mince words. He told us that creatures like the one we'd seen were real, though rare, and that the government had been monitoring them for years. "They're not animals," he explained. "Not in the way you'd think. They're intelligent, cunning, and highly territorial. When one shows up, it's our job to make sure it doesn't become a threat." "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Frank demanded, his grip tightening on his rifle. Daniels didn't flinch. "That's classified," he said. "But I can assure you we have the situation under control." I wasn't convinced. "You mean to tell me this thing has been roaming around and you've known about it?" I asked. "Why didn't you warn us?" Daniels sighed. "Because creatures like this are complicated. If the general public knew about them, it would cause mass panic. Our job is to contain the situation quietly and efficiently." Jean let out a bitter laugh. "Quietly and efficiently? Tell that to the people it's terrorized." Daniels didn't respond to that. Instead, he gestured toward the woods. "We've already begun our search. I'd advise you to stay inside and let us handle it." As the agents disappeared into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't telling us everything. Their presence only raised more questions. How many of these creatures were out there? How long had the government known about them? And most importantly, what would happen if they failed? That night, as darkness fell once again, the unease in my chest grew stronger. The woods seemed alive with shadows, each one darker and more menacing than the last. The creature was still out there, I was sure of it. And though the agents claimed they had it under control, I couldn't bring myself to believe them. I sat by the window, staring out into the blackness, my knife in one hand and my pistol in the other. I didn't know what the morning would bring, but I knew one thing for certain. The nightmare was far from over. The hours stretched into the night. each second dragging under the weight of tension that pressed on all of us like a suffocating fog. Inside the house, silence reigned, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wood and the soft murmur of my wife as she tried to comfort our daughter. Jean and Frank took turns patrolling the windows, their weapons at the ready, while I sat at the kitchen table, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't push aside. What if the agents failed? What if the creature returned? The thought of those glowing eyes and that hulking, monstrous form sent a shiver down my spine. No matter how many times I tried to reassure myself, the memory of its snarling visage refused to fade. And then there was the smirk, that haunting, almost human smile that had chilled me to my core. It wasn't just a beast, it was something far worse. A sudden knock at the door shattered the quiet, making all of us jump. I leapt to my feet, my hand instinctively going to the knife at my belt. Jean raised his shotgun, motioning for us to stay back as he approached the door. "Who's there?" he barked, his voice firm but strained. "It's Daniels," came the reply. "We need to talk." Jean hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door and swinging it open. Agent Daniels stood on the porch, his face grim, a flashlight in one hand and a pistol holstered at his side. Behind him, the other agents lingered in the shadows, their expressions unreadable. "We've made progress," Daniels said as he stepped inside, his voice low. "But there's something you need to know." Daniels didn't waste time with pleasantries. He gestured for us to gather around and began to speak, his words measured and deliberate. "The creature you encountered is more dangerous than we initially believed," he said. "We've tracked it to a den deep in the woods, but it's not alone." The air seemed to grow colder at his words. "What do you mean, not alone?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniels met my gaze, his expression grave. "There's evidence of others," he said. "Tracks, markings, and signs of a pack. We're dealing with more than one." Jean let out a string of curses under his breath, while Frank's knuckles whitened around the grip of his rifle. My wife, who had joined us at the table, reached for my hand, her grip tight with fear. "How many?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Daniels shook his head. "We don't know for sure. 2, maybe 3. But the behavior we've observed suggests they're working together. That's unusual. Most of these creatures are solitary. And what does that mean for us?" Jean demanded, his voice rising. "Are we sitting ducks here while you guys play cat and mouse in the woods?" Daniels held up a hand. "We're doing everything we can to neutralize the threat," he said. "But until we've contained the situation, I need you all to stay inside. Lock your doors, keep your weapons close, and do not, under any circumstances, go outside after dark." His words did little to ease my growing sense of dread. If the creature or creatures wanted to get in, I doubted a locked door would stop them. The night wore on, each passing hour a test of endurance. We huddled in the living room, the tension so thick it felt like a living thing. Outside, the woods seemed to hold their breath, the usual nighttime symphony of crickets and owls eerily absent. Even the cattle were silent, their earlier agitation replaced by an unnatural stillness. At one point, Jean turned to me, his face pale and drawn. "You think those agents can really handle this?" he asked. I wanted to say yes, to offer him some semblance of hope, but I couldn't lie. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we don't have much of a choice." Around midnight, a sound broke the silence. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. My heart stopped as I glanced at the others. Jean was already on his feet, his shotgun raised, while Frank moved to the window, his movements cautious but swift. "It's close," Frank whispered, his voice trembling. Daniels, who had stayed behind with us, motioned for everyone to stay quiet. He moved to the door, his hand on the hilt of his pistol, and peered outside through the peephole. After a moment, he turned back to us, his expression grim. "Stay here," he said. "I'll handle this." Before any of us could protest, he stepped outside, closing the door quietly behind him. We listened as his footsteps faded, leaving us alone in the suffocating silence. It wasn't long before chaos erupted. A series of gunshots rang out, shattering the quiet night. My wife let out a gasp, clutching our daughter tighter as the rest of us scrambled to the windows. Through the glass, I could see the flashes of muzzle fire in the distance, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of snarls and growls. "They've found it," Jean muttered, his voice barely audible. I could only watch, my stomach twisting in knots as the battle unfolded. The agent's strategy was methodical. They moved in coordinated formations, their weapons trained on the shadows. But the creature or creatures were relentless, their movements impossibly fast and fluid. At one point I caught a glimpse of a hulking silhouette darting between the trees, its glowing eyes fixed on the men pursuing it. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the gunfire stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, a heavy, oppressive weight that settled over us like a shroud. My pulse raced as I strained to see what was happening, but the darkness revealed nothing. "Do you think they got it?" Frank asked, his voice tinged with both hope and fear. Before I could answer, a deafening crash echoed from the direction of the barn. The sound was so sudden and jarring that it made us all jump. My blood ran cold as I realized what it meant. "It's here," I whispered. The next moments were a blur of panic and desperation. We barely had time to react before the creature was upon us. It moved with terrifying speed, its massive form a shadowy blur as it hurtled toward the house. The first blow shattered the porch railing, splintering the wood like it was nothing. The second sent the front door flying off its hinges, the sound of the impact reverberating through the house. Jean fired first, his shotgun blast echoing like thunder. The creature recoiled but didn't fall, its glowing eyes locking onto him with a fury that froze my blood. Frank followed suit, his rifle barking as he sent round after round into the beast. Each shot seemed to stagger it, but it wasn't enough. It kept coming. "Get upstairs!" I shouted to my wife, pushing her toward the staircase. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes wide with fear, before obeying. I turned back to see Jean being thrown across the room, his body slamming into the wall with a sickening thud. Frank was reloading, his hands shaking as he tried to steady his aim. I didn't think. I couldn't. I grabbed the knife from my belt and lunged at the creature, the blade sinking into its side. It let out a deafening roar, its massive hands swiping at me and sending me crashing to the floor. The pain was immediate and all-consuming, but I forced myself to get up, adrenaline overriding everything else. Daniels appeared then, his face bloodied but determined. He held a device in his hand, a small black cylinder that emitted a high-pitched whine. The creature froze, its body convulsing as the sound seemed to overwhelm it. Daniels shouted something I couldn't hear over the noise, and the other agents stormed in, their weapons blazing. The creature let out one final, ear-splitting roar before collapsing to the ground, its massive body heaving with labored breaths. The agents moved quickly, securing it with chains and restraints that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Daniels turned to me, his expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. "It's over," he said, but as I looked at the creature, its glowing eyes still fixed on me, even in defeat, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from the end. The creature lay motionless, its chest heaving as it drew shallow, ragged breaths. The agents worked quickly, wrapping it in heavy chains that seemed to emit a faint, otherworldly glow. I could still hear the high-pitched whine from Daniel's device, though it had grown quieter, its intensity now subdued. The eerie glow of the chains cast strange shadows on the walls, painting the scene with an almost surreal quality. My legs felt like they might give out beneath me, but I forced myself to stay upright. Jean groaned from where he'd been thrown, his face pale as he clutched his ribs. Frank had managed to steady himself, though his hands were still trembling as he reloaded his rifle. My wife and daughter were upstairs, safe for the moment, though I doubted they felt secure. Daniels approached me, his face grim. "We've got it," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "But this isn't the end." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice hoarse. I glanced at the creature, its eyes still glowing faintly in the dim light. "You said it's over." Daniels shook his head. "This one might be down, but there are more out there," he said, "and now they know about you." The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. I looked back at the creature, its body massive and grotesque even in defeat. The idea that there could be more of them lurking in the woods waiting for the right moment to strike was almost too much to bear. Over the next few hours, the agents worked tirelessly, securing the creature and preparing to transport it. They moved with precision and efficiency, their demeanor cool and professional despite the chaos we had just endured. Daniels stayed close, answering my questions in cryptic, measured responses that left me more unsettled than reassured. "What is it?" I asked at one point, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniels hesitated before answering. "Something that shouldn't exist," he said. "We've encountered these creatures before, but they're rare. Most people who see them don't live to tell the tale." I shuddered at his words. "Why here?" I pressed. "Why now?" Daniels didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window, his expression distant. "They're drawn to certain places," he said finally. "Certain people. I can't explain why, but it's not random." His words sent a chill down my spine. I thought of the cattle huddled in the corner of the field, the scratches on the side of the house, the haunting howls that had echoed through the night. Had we somehow attracted this creature? Or had it been here all along, watching and waiting? By dawn, the agents were ready to leave. The creature had been loaded into the back of their black van, its massive form barely contained by the reinforced restraints. Daniels lingered for a moment, his gaze meeting mine. "Stay vigilant," he said. "If you see or hear anything unusual, call this number." He handed me a small, unmarked card with a single phone number printed on it. "And for your own safety, don't tell anyone about what happened here." I nodded, though the words felt hollow. How could I possibly go back to my life after what I had seen? The thought of stepping outside, of venturing into the woods again, seemed impossible. As the agents pulled away, their vehicles disappearing down the dirt road, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. The immediate danger was gone, but the unease remained, a gnawing fear that refused to be silenced. In the days that followed, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. The cattle settled back into their routine, no longer huddling in fear. The woods, once so menacing, seemed to regain some of their natural rhythm. Birds chirped, the wind rustled through the trees, and the oppressive silence that had haunted us was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Every rustle of leaves, every distant howl sent a jolt of fear through me. My once beloved woods, the place where I had spent so many peaceful hours, now felt like a prison. Jean and Frank were similarly affected. Jean refused to leave his house after dark, while Frank spoke of moving away altogether. "It's not worth it," he said one evening over a beer. "Whatever they are, they don't belong here, and I'm not sticking around to find out what happens next." As much as I tried to put the incident behind me, I couldn't escape the lingering questions. What were these creatures? Why had they come here? And perhaps most unsettling of all, would they come back? I thought often of Daniel's warning, his cryptic words echoing in my mind. "They know about you." It was a chilling thought, one that kept me awake at night. Had we crossed some invisible line by confronting the creature? Had we become a target, marked in some way that I couldn't understand? The weeks turned into months, and though the fear began to fade, it never disappeared entirely. I avoided the woods, sticking close to the house whenever possible. My wife tried to reassure me, her gentle words a balm to my frayed nerves. But even she couldn't fully understand what I had been through. And then one night I heard it again, the howl. Low and guttural, it echoed through the trees. sending a chill down my spine. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I listened. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. They were still out there. In the end, I came to a sobering realization. Some things aren't meant to be understood. The world is vast and mysterious, filled with wonders and horrors that defy explanation. What I had encountered was a glimpse into that unknown, a reminder that humanity does not hold dominion over the earth as we like to believe. I could spend the rest of my life searching for answers, trying to unravel the mysteries of that night. But what would it change? The creatures would still be out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. And so, I chose to move forward, not without fear, but with a renewed sense of respect for the unknown. The woods may never feel safe again, but they are no longer my enemy. They are a reminder of the fragility of our existence, of the thin veil that separates us from the wild, untamed forces that surround us. As I write these words, the memory of that night still lingers, vivid and unrelenting. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. We are not alone, and perhaps that is the most terrifying truth of all.